Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards, where no ship is safe from being called a cow. I went into a public house to get a pint of beer. The publican he up and says, "We serve no redcoats here." The girls behind the bar, they laughed and giggled fit to die. I outs into the street again, and to myself says I, "Oh, it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy go away. But it's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play." The band begins to play, my boys, the band begins to play. Oh, it's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play. I went into a theater as sober as could be. They gave a drunk civilian room, but hadn't none for me. They sent me to the gallery or round the music halls. But when it comes to fighting, Lord, they'll shove me in the stalls. For it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy wait outside. But it's special train for Atkins when the trooper's on the tide. The troop ship's on the tide, my boys, the troop ship's on the tide. Oh, it's special train for Atkins when the trooper's on the tide. Yes, make and mock of uniforms that guard you while you sleep is cheaper than them uniforms and their starvation cheap. And hustlin' drunken sailors when they're going large a bit is 5 times better business than paradin' in full kit. Then it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy how's your soul? But it's thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll. The drums begin to roll, my boys, the drums begin to roll. Oh, it's thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll. We aren't no thin red heroes, nor we aren't no blackguards too, but single men in barracks most remarkable like you. And if sometimes our conduct isn't all your fancy paints, why single men in barracks don't grow into plaster saints. Well, it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy fall behind. But it's pleased to walk in front, sir, when there's trouble in the wind. Oh, there's trouble in the wind, my boys, there's trouble in the wind. Oh, it's pleased to walk in front, sir, when there's trouble in the wind. You talk of better food for us and schools and fires and all. We'll wait for extra rations if you treat us rational. Don't mess about the cookroom slops, but prove it to our face. The widow's uniform is not the soldier man's disgrace. For it's Tommy this and Tommy that and chuck him out the brute. But it's savior of his country when the guns begin to shoot. And it's Tommy this and Tommy that and anything you please. And Tommy ain't a bloomin' fool, you bet that Tommy sees. For those sophonts out there whose educational systems f***ing failed them, that is, of course, the poem Tommy by Joseph Rudyard Kipling, written in about 1890 by your accounting. Why am I recounting really old poetry for you? Well, I want you to keep in mind the line of single men in barracks do not grow into plaster saints. Because all throughout history, when your militaries were organized, disorganized, ragtag, whatever, most of your Huey fighting force always consists of single men in barracks. They're young, frequently far too young by almost any standards, and they are sent into war to die. And naturally, that process makes them a little rough around the edges. And naturally, this causes some, let's go with conflict between the armed forces and the civilians of your planet. It's understandable. The public affairs photos of your militaries are all shining brass and neatly pressed uniforms and this, that, and a fucking other, while the realities of your military is that they are there to kill people and break their shit. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. But that's the macro level. On the micro level, those single men in barracks are frequently a problem. Your United States has their the Marine Corps, the leathernecks, the jarheads. There's a joke in that community that if you leave a single Marine alone in a locked room with a solid titanium sphere, he will have either broken it, lost it, or impregnated it by the next morning. And there's honestly a fair bit of truth to that kind of, mythos, to be perfectly fair. In fact, pretty much all branches of your United States military have a concept to cover this, and that is known as Private Schmuckatelli, or seaman, or airman, or whatever. Anyways, Joe Schmuckatelli is your average Mark I, Mod 0, lowest ranking, lowest trained, lowest everything enlisted person. If there is something dumb to be done as a enlisted person in the military, Schmuckatelli's done it. And yeah, he's technically standing in as a proxy because the military, your United States military has been around for, 250 odd years or something like that? Basically, it's a function of the whole 1,000 monkeys with 1,000 typewriters thing. If there is a dumb thing to do, someone has probably done it already, or you should probably start planning ahead for someone else doing something else really, really stupid. And that's basically what Schmuckatelli is he's an effigy to make management, whether they're senior enlisted or the officers or whomever, think about how all the possible ways this could go wrong, courtesy of these single men in barracks definitely not being plaster saints. And as an example of the kinds of things that are still being invented as things that can go wrong, allow me to recount you one of the many stories I picked up by way of that woefully lost sailor who somehow found his way to my shipyard one day. And, well, you Humies are quite talkative once we get enough ethanol in you. Anyways, this sailor had the opportunity to go to a function with alcohol, again with the ethanol thing, that had a multinational contingent attending it, and had the opportunity to speak with the executive officer from a Canadian minesweep. Well, technically it was a Kingston-class coastal defense vehicle, but they filled the role, so I guess it's all the same in the end. In any case, the sailor was particularly impressed with how massively overarmed the Kingston-class happened to be, courtesy of the, chain guns being mounted on the gunwales. They literally had corrugated pipe to take the spent brass over the side of the boat, or so he told me. He was very fixated on that particular detail. But anyways, executive officer. This particular executive officer was drunk. And I'm not just saying, like drunk. I'm saying sailor drunk. Like, it was genuinely astonishing, apparently, that this particular sailor was vertical ventilating and articulating his words in an understandable fashion. He was all the sheets to the wind. And this was technically a social event, so it wasn't a big deal, and his sailors were basically helping him move from table to table, which is what crews typically do, so it all worked out in the end. Anyways, the sailor that I got, sailor drunk in my shipyards, recounted that he actually picked up a story from this executive officer. And the story goes something like this. Their ship had pulled into a nameless port that maybe the sailor remembered, maybe he didn't. It's irrelevant at this point. Anyways, they pulled into a port for a brief shore leave exercise. And as sailors, those not plaster saints are wont to do when they pull into port for shore leave, a couple sailors went out in town and got fucking drunk. And again, we're not talking y'all cheap-ass, weak-ass civilian drunk. We are talking right proper goddamn sailor drunk. And anyways, these sailors wrapped up their evening and figured they should start heading on back to the ship and their bunks, and got to the end of the pier where their ship was tied up, and discovered that some absolute idiot had left a couple forklifts at the end of the pier, at the shoreside end of the pier. And this aforementioned idiot, as actually happens frighteningly frequently at your seaports, had left the keys in the fucking forklifts. And there were 2 forklifts. And there were 2 sailors. And there was this nice, long, perfectly flat, perfectly smooth, perfectly level pier. It was about a quarter-mile long. Oh no. So yeah, the sailors did exactly what you'd expect the sailors to have done. They hopped in the forklifts, cranked them up, and staged a drag race. And as perfectly, absolutely sailor-drunk sailors are wont to do, they managed to actually steer perfectly down the pier the entire way. The thing they didn't manage to do was account for the speed that they were traveling by the time they got to the end of the pier. I am told that the sailors did not have a scratch on them nor a drop of water, but the same cannot be said for the forklifts. So anyways, this all happened late at night, and the next day the ship pulled out. And about, 10 nautical miles or so from shore, which is still technically inside of the, territorial waters that your countries claim out into their ocean, which is 12 nautical miles, by the way, for the reference, if you care. The ship got a hail from the dockmaster back at the shipyard. You know, someone like me who would be like, wait a second, there were 2 forklifts on that pier last night, and now they're not. The f***, man? So anyways, the conversation went a little more politely than that. Basically, the harbor master called up the ship and said, hey, does anyone know about these 2 missing forklifts? And of course, the officer on deck called the XO and was like, this is way above my pay grade. And the XO showed up on the bridge and had a conversation with the harbor master and was like, I don't actually know what happened to the forklifts. Let me get back to you. So the XO then went to the chief of the boat. And that's actually not technically a surface Navy term. Chief of the boat is a concept that only occurs in the submarine Navy of basically any country on Earth that I'm familiar with. And it's basically the senior enlisted person on the ship. That's why it's called Chief of the Boat, because all submarines are boats, as opposed to surface ships, which are ships, as long as they're long enough and wide enough and fit certain rules. Never mind. Anyways, I'm just going to colloquially call the most senior enlisted person on a ship the chief of the boat just because it's a fun title. And the XO came to this chief of the boat and said, hey, should I know anything about 2 missing forklifts back at that port? And the chief of the boat looked at the XO and said, do you want to know anything about 2 missing forklifts back at that port? And the XO took a beat, said, nope. And went back to the bridge and said, hey, harbor master, I don't know anything about those 2 missing forklifts, but best of luck and have a nice day. Now, of course, the executive officer eventually got the full story, and of course, there were some internal conversations on that ship regarding things you can and cannot do with the harbor's equipment when you tie up at a given port. And I know for a fact that those 2 sailors were very severely reprimanded and punished. In fact, your United States Navy just recently got rid of a punishment that commanding officers can just dole out because they want to, which was 3 days confinement on bread and water. Yeah, it was solitary confinement, and the only thing you could eat for 3 days was bread and water. I understand that does a really fucky thing to your humy digestion systems and is totally unpleasant, and they just recently got rid of it. So, yeah, the Canadian Navy and that particular ship totally handled the problem of their sailors driving forklifts off the end of the pier. But this is the Plaster Saint problem. Was it okay that 2 sailors managed to turn 2 forklifts into permanent harbor anchors? Of course it fucking isn't. But is that something one should expect from Seaman Schmuckatelli? Abso-fucking-lutely. So yeah, I get that there's a disconnect between your humy civilian side and your humy military side. It makes total sense from the outside. But man, given that y'all are still heavily invested in killing each other, you'd think you'd understand better that people who are good at killing other people are not, plaster saints. And neither are they good at keeping forklifts from, ending up at the bottom of a harbor. But man, if any one of your little nation-state things ever came under attack, you would be begging for one of these totally not plaster saints to stand up and do something. Maybe you should think about that. And if you don't want to think about that, well, there's always Tommy this and Tommy that, right? And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.